In ancient China, there is a saying, water flows downward, the sage climbs upward. Imagine Mount Huashan, one of China's 5 sacred mountains. Thousands of steps carved into the rock, clouds swaying around the peak like dragon's breath. At the base, the city, full of people, noise, desires, fear. At the summit, silence, so complete you can hear the clouds growing. Between them, the path, steep, lonely, dangerous. Most people spend their lives at the base, looking up and saying, someday, some begin the ascent. But at the first difficulty, they return down to the warmth of the multitude. Few, so few you can count them on your fingers, reach the summit. These few have learned the secret I will share with you today. Solitude is not punishment, it is the path, and this path leads upward. Lao Tzu, the sage who wrote the I Ching 2,500 years ago, knew this. He says, knowing others is wisdom, knowing yourself is enlightenment. But how can you know yourself when you're always surrounded by the voices of others? The answer is simple and ancient. Climb the mountain. Stay alone. Listen. Chapter 1. The Tao, the path that cannot be named. Lao Tzu begins his great work with a riddle. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. What does this mean for us, seekers of understanding solitude? Imagine that your entire life you've walked on paths drawn by others. Your parents outlined one path, society, another, your friends, a third, social media, a fourth. You've walked all these paths simultaneously, trying to please all directions, and the result is you are nowhere. Lao Tzu teaches a radical truth. The true path is one that no one can describe to another, because your path is one of a kind, unique as your fingerprint, untranslatable into a foreign language. And where do you discover this unnameable path? In solitude. The Taoist sages of antiquity knew this. They retreated to the mountains, not because they hated people, but because they loved truth. In the mountains, far from the noise of markets and palaces, they listened to something deeper, the pulse of the universe itself. Zhuangzi, another great Taoist teacher, tells a story. One day, the fisherman Fu casts his line in the Pu River. The Prince of Chu sends 2 high-ranking officials to him with a message. I would like to burden you with the administration of my territory. Fu, without turning his head, continues to hold his rod and says, I hear that in Chu there is a sacred tortoise, dead for 3,000 years, which the prince keeps in the temple, wrapped in silk. In your opinion, would this tortoise prefer to be dead but honored, or alive and dragging its tail in the mud? Of course, it would prefer to be alive and dragging its tail in the mud, the officials reply. Then go away, says Fu. I will drag my tail in the mud. Do you see the beauty of this story? The fisherman understands something most people miss. The freedom of solitude is more valuable than the golden cage of social honors. But Lao Tzu goes further. He teaches the concept of wu wei, non-action, or more accurately translated, action without effort, action in harmony with the natural flow. Imagine a river. It doesn't struggle to reach the sea, it simply flows. The rock in it doesn't resist. The water goes around it. Over time, the soft water wears away the hard rock. Lao Tzu writes, the softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest. That which has no substance penetrates even where there is no crevice. Therefore, I know the benefit of non-action. What does this have to do with solitude? Everything. In solitude, you learn wu wei. You learn not to fight with yourself. You learn not to force happiness, not to impose calm, not to demand wisdom. Instead, you become like the mountain lake, quiet, peaceful, reflecting the sky as it is. Zhuangzi asks, do you know why water is so clear? Because it doesn't struggle to be something else. In solitude, for the first time in your life, you can stop struggling to be something else. You can simply be, and in this simple being lies incredible power. Chapter 2. Yin and Yang, the dance of solitude and connection. Look at the yin and yang symbol, black and white, wrapped in a dance. But notice something important. In the black, there is a point of white. In the white, a point of black. Why? Because nothing is absolute. Everything contains the seed of its opposite. So it is with solitude. Solitude and connection yang are not enemies. They are complementary forces. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot truly connect with others if you haven't first met yourself in solitude, and you cannot understand who you are without being reflected in the mirror of other people. The ancient Chinese sages understood this perfectly. They were not hermits by necessity, but by choice, and this choice was cyclical, like the seasons. Confucius, although he taught primarily about social relationships and duties, also acknowledges the importance of solitude. He says, when I walk among three people, I can always find a teacher among them. I choose the good in one and follow it, the bad in another and correct it in myself. But he also adds, the superior man seeks within himself, the inferior man seeks in others. Do you see the balance? You learn from others, but you seek within yourself, and this seeking within yourself requires solitude. Imagine that the breathing of life has two stages, inhalation and exhalation. Sociality is inhalation. You take information, energy, experiences from the world. Solitude is exhalation. You process, integrate, transform experience into wisdom. Most modern people inhale continuously. They consume information, relationships, experiences without pause. The result? Suffocation, anxiety, lostness. Solitude is the exhalation, without which every inhalation becomes poison. Mencius, a follower of Confucius, puts it this way: man must care for his own heart, as a gardener cares for his garden. If you don't enter the garden regularly, the weeds will choke the flowers. Solitude is the time when you enter the garden of your heart. You weed out the grasses of false thoughts. You water the seeds of virtue. You observe what grows. But here's the paradox that the ancient Chinese understood intuitively. The deeper you know yourself in solitude, the more authentically you can connect with others. Why? Because when you know your nature, you recognize it in others. Zhuangzi tells of a woodcarver who is so masterful in his art that he doesn't see the wood, he sees its spirit. He doesn't impose his will on the wood. He discovers the natural form hidden inside and simply liberates it. So it is with relationships. When you know yourself, you don't impose false roles on others. You see them as they are. And paradoxically, this clarity of vision comes from solitude. Chapter 3. Buddha and the Mountain of Emptiness. Now, let's cross the border from Taoism to Buddhism, another great tradition, born in India but finding a new home in China. Buddha sits under the Bodhi tree, alone. For 18 years he has wandered, seeking truth among teachers. Now, on this night, he understands. Truth cannot be given, it can only be experienced. And the experience requires how complete solitude. Imagine this moment. Buddha has abandoned the world, wealth, family, comfort. He has abandoned asceticism too, the self-torture he experimented with for years. Now, he simply sits. observes his mind, his breath, and in this simple solitude, on the border between night and dawn, he sees. What does he see? That suffering comes from attachment. That attachment comes from the illusion of a permanent self. That this self is a construction built from thoughts, memories, desires, but is not solid reality. And in the moment he sees this, he is free. But let's be practical. What does this mean for us, who are not Buddha, who don't meditate under trees, but live in apartments and work on computers? In Chan Buddhism, the Japanese call it Zen, there is a practice called Zazen, simply sitting. Nothing mystical, nothing complicated. You simply sit, alone. You observe your mind without engaging with its thoughts. Imagine your mind as the sky. Thoughts are clouds. Most people think they are the clouds. They panic when there's a storm. They rejoice when it's clear. But the Buddhist understands, I am not the clouds. I am the sky. Clouds come and go. The sky remains. And where do you discover this sky? In the solitude of practice. When you sit alone, without distraction, without escape, simply observing, you begin to see the difference between the transient clouds and the eternal sky. A Chan teacher from the Tang dynasty, Linji, says something radical. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Shocking, right? But what does it mean? It means don't attach even to sacred images. Don't seek salvation outside. Even Buddha, if he becomes an object of attachment, obstructs you. The truth is within you, and to find it, you must enter solitude. Solitude where there are no teachers, no books, no saviors, only you and truth, face to face. There's a famous Chan story. A student asks the teacher, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West? The teacher answers, the cypress tree in the courtyard. The student is confused. What does the cypress have to do with Buddha? Everything and nothing. The cypress simply is. It doesn't try to be something else. It doesn't philosophize about its meaning. It roots, grows, exists. In solitude, you too can become like the cypress. Simply exist, without trying to justify your existence, without competing, without comparing. Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Chan Buddhism, says, from the very beginning, not a single thing exists. This sounds nihilistic, but it's not. He's saying, all these categories we create, solitude, connection, happiness, unhappiness, they are mental constructions. Beneath them is pure reality, before words, before thoughts. And in solitude, when the mind quiets, you can touch this reality. Chapter 4. I Ching, the Book of Changes and the Rhythm of Solitude. Now, let's open one of the most ancient books in human history, the I Ching, the Book of Changes, more than 3,000 years old. The I Ching teaches one fundamental principle. Everything changes. The only constant is change itself. There are 64 hexagrams in the I Ching, each representing a different configuration of yin and yang energies. And the important thing is, no configuration is permanent. Each transforms into another. What does this mean for solitude? It means solitude is not a fixed state. It is a phase, a season, part of a larger cycle. Imagine the year. Spring is a time of sociality, going out, blooming, connecting. Summer, peak of activity. Autumn, gathering the harvest, preparing for withdrawal. Winter, deep solitude, a time when seeds rest under the snow, invisible but alive, preparing for the next spring. Modern man wants eternal spring, wants constant sociality, constant stimulation, constant growth. But nature doesn't work that way, and the nature of the human soul doesn't work that way either. You need winter, a period of withdrawal, of silence, of solitude, not as punishment, but as a necessary part of the cycle. Hexagram 52 inches, the I Ching, is called Zhen, the mountain, stillness. It teaches keeping still as a mountain, keeping your back still, so that you no longer feel your body. You enter the courtyard and do not see your people. What a strange description. Not to feel your body, not to see the people in the courtyard. This is a description of a state of deep meditation, of complete solitude, not physical solitude, but psychic stillness. The mind is so centered, so focused inward, that external stimuli disappear. But the I Ching doesn't say, stay in this state forever. It says, this is a time for stillness. Soon will come a time for movement, time for action, time for connecting. Wisdom is knowing which season you're experiencing and acting accordingly. There's another hexagram, number 33, called Dune, retreat. The I Ching says, retreat, success. In small matters, it is favorable to be persevering. Notice, retreat is success, not failure, not defeat, success. Why? Because there are moments in life when the wisest thing you can do is retreat, step back, find solitude. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise. The general who knows when to retreat wins the war. The leader who knows when to be silent hears the truth. The person who knows when to seek solitude preserves their soul. But the I Ching also warns, retreat must be timely, not too early. You'll look like a deserter. Not too late, you'll be run over. So it is with solitude. There is a right moment for solitude, a moment when your soul whispers, I need silence. I need time alone. Most people ignore this whisper. They keep running until they collapse. The sage listens to the whisper and acts before the collapse. Chapter 5. Zhuangzi and the Butterfly Dream. Zhuangzi is perhaps the most poetic of all Taoist philosophers. His stories are like paintings drawn with words, each hiding multiple layers of meaning. One of his most famous stories is this. Once Zhuangzi dreamed he was a butterfly, a happy, carefree butterfly, enjoying itself, unaware it was Zhuangzi. Suddenly he awoke and found himself solidly and unmistakably Zhuangzi. But he didn't know if he was Zhuangzi, who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming it was Zhuangzi. Why do I tell this story in the context of solitude? Because solitude is the moment when you can awaken from the dreams imposed on you by society. All your life, they tell you who you are. Your parents give the first version, school, the second, friends, the third, employers, the fourth. Social media, countless versions, as many as there are platforms. And you accept these versions as truth. You think, this is who I am. But in solitude, something strange happens. All these voices quiet down. All these identities begin to dissolve. And in that moment, the question appears, who am I really? Zhuangzi doesn't give an answer. He simply poses the question. And in that lies the wisdom. Because the true answer is not a concept, not a word, not an identity you can describe. The true answer is an experience of true nature, beyond words, beyond roles, beyond social masks. And this experience happens in solitude. Zhuangzi also tells another story about a woodcarver who must craft a bell stand for the king. He says, when I begin to make a bell stand, I guard my energy without dispersing it. I fast to calm my heart. After 3 days of fasting, I forget every reward or prestige. After 5 days, I forget praise or criticism. After 7 days, I forget even my body and limbs. At this moment, the art of the court no longer exists for me. My entire focus is on the craft, without external distraction. Then I go to the forest and look at the natural nature of the trees. When I see the tree that is perfect for the stand, I clearly see the stand itself within it. All I have to do is extend my hand and begin work. If I don't see this, I simply continue. I do nothing. Do you see the process? First, fasting, withdrawal, solitude. In this solitude, the mind clears, the ego disappears, social anxieties disappear, even awareness of the body disappears. And then, clear seeing. Truth reveals itself. Not because you forced it, but because you created the space in which it can appear. This is the power of solitude in Taoist philosophy. It is not the absence of something. It is the creation of space, empty space in which truth can be born. Lao Tzu says it this way: 30 spokes converge on a hub, but the use of the cart depends on the emptiness between them. Clay is shaped into vessels, but the use of the vessel depends on the emptiness inside. Doors and windows are cut to make a room, but the use of the room depends on the empty space within. Therefore, the useful comes from what is present, but the use comes from what is absent. Solitude is the empty space. Society is the walls. Both are necessary, but without the empty space, without solitude, there is no place to live. Chapter 6. Confucius and the Room of Perfection. Now let's return to Confucius, whom I mentioned earlier, but this time delve deeper. Confucius is known primarily for his social philosophy. He teaches about relationships, duties, rituals. At first glance, he seems the least likely candidate to defend solitude. But look more carefully. Confucius introduces the concept of Zhuangzi, the superior person. And what does the superior person do? Confucius says, the superior person seeks within himself, the inferior person seeks in others. This is a powerful distinction. The inferior person always asks, what will others say? Do they approve of me? Do they like me? His self-esteem depends on external approval. The superior person asks, did I act correctly according to my principles? Was I true to myself? His self-esteem comes from within. And where does this inner certainty come from? From the solitude of self-reflection. Confucius also says, when you see a good person, think of becoming like them. When you see a bad person, examine your own heart. Notice the second part. Examine your own heart. Not judge the bad person. Not talk about the bad person. But examine yourself. And this examination happens in silence, in solitude. Confucius describes the process of self-development as having stages. He says, at 15, my mind was set on learning. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I had no more doubts. At 50, I understood the will of heaven. At 60, my ear was attuned. At 70, I could follow my heart without transgressing the rules. The last sentence is key. I could follow my heart without transgressing the rules. This is ultimate freedom, to be so integrated, so whole, that your inner desires and external principles coincide. You don't have to fight with yourself. You simply act naturally, and your actions are right. But how do you reach this level? Through years of self-examination, self-reflection, self-cultivation, and all these self-words require solitude. There is a practice in Confucianism called I Ching, introspection, self-examination. This is a daily exercise where you review your day, examine your actions, ask yourself, was I true to my principles? Where did I err? What can I improve? This is not masochistic self-criticism. This is gardening of the soul. Careful, loving removal of weeds so that the flowers of virtue can grow. And this gardening requires time spent alone. Mencius, Confucius's follower, introduces the idea that human nature is good by nature. He says, "Every person has a heart that cannot bear the suffering of others." But he also says that this natural goodness can be choked by bad influences, like trees on a mountain that are cut down again and again until the mountain becomes bare. The solution? Protect the mountain. Give the trees time to grow, sheltered from the axe. Metaphorically, find solitude where your good nature can recover, far from the destructive influences of the false world. Mencius tells of the philosopher Lao Tzu, who says, "Human nature is like a willow tree. Righteousness is like a cup." Shaping human nature into humanity and righteousness is like shaping a willow into a cup. Mencius responds, "Can you make a cup from willow without harming it? You must harm and deform the willow to make a cup. If you must harm and deform the willow to make a cup, then must you harm and deform man to make humanity and righteousness?" This is a deep critique of coercion. True virtue is not imposed from outside through violence. It is cultivated from within through attention. And this attention requires silence, solitude, space. Chapter 7. Seneca and Stoic Solitude. Here I'll make a small digression. Seneca is not a Chinese philosopher. He's a Roman Stoic, but there's a reason to include him. Because Stoicism and Taoism, though arising at opposite ends of the world, share striking similarities. Seneca writes letters to his friend Lucilius, and in them reveals deep truths about solitude. He says, "You can be anywhere, as long as you're not in too many places." What does this mean? That presence is more important than physical location. You can travel the entire world and be nowhere because your mind is fragmented. Or you can sit in one room and be fully there, whole. Seneca also writes, "You must have someone with whom to eat and drink, someone to return to, because to be alone without a friend is to be like a wild beast. But to always be with people and never alone is equally destructive." Balance. Again, like yin and yang. But here is his most powerful message. Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with people who make you better. Welcome those whom you can make better. This is a mutual process. People learn while teaching others. Retire into yourself. This is the inner solitude that is possible even in a crowd. How do ancient sages do it? They create an inner citadel, an impenetrable fortress of peace within the soul, where external chaos cannot enter. Marcus Aurelius, another Stoic and Roman emperor, writes, "People seek retreats in the countryside, on the seashore, in the mountains, and you too have a strong habit of desiring such things, but all this is the most ordinary. For you can, whenever you wish, retreat into yourself. Nowhere does man find a quieter and more peaceful refuge than in his own soul." This is powerful. Solitude is not only a place, it is a state of mind. Epilogue. Descending from the mountain. But here's something important you must understand. The goal is not to stay on the mountain forever. Buddha descends from the Bodhi tree. He gives teachings for 45 years. Confucius leaves solitude and travels through kingdoms trying to serve society. Even Lao Tzu, who glorifies solitude, writes a book because he understands wisdom that is not shared is dead wisdom. The mountain is not a destination. It is a recharging, a source, a place you go to fill yourself, so you have something to give when you descend. Imagine a spring on the mountain. It fills from rains and snows. If it didn't give water downward, it would overflow and become a swamp. But because it gives, it remains pure. So it is with you. You go into solitude to fill yourself. Then you return to the world to give. and after time you return again to solitude. A cycle, like breathing, like the seasons. There's a story about a student who asks his teacher, "Teacher, I've meditated for years. I've achieved peace. But when I go to the marketplace, everything falls apart. What should I do?" The teacher answers, "Meditation on the mountain is like heating a sword in fire. Very important. But the real test is when you plunge it into water. There, you see if the steel is true. The marketplace is your water. Keep going there." Solitude doesn't make you better than others. It prepares you to serve others. Because when you know yourself, you understand others. When you've found peace within yourself, you can be a presence of peace for others. When you've met your darkness, you can hold light for those still struggling with theirs. Conclusion: the open door. Zhuangzi ends one of his texts with these words: "The way has its doors and rooms. Each door is a new possibility. Each room is a new understanding. But the most important door is the one that leads to yourself. This door is always here, always open, always waiting. Most people spend their lives walking past it, too busy, too afraid, too distracted to enter. But it is here, now, in this moment. You can find it in a quiet morning when the world still sleeps, in a long walk without a phone, in the breath when you sit and simply watch your thoughts pass like clouds. Solitude doesn't wait for you on some distant mountain. It is here, in every moment when you choose to be present with yourself. Lao Tzu says it best: "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." This step is not toward some external place. It is a step inward, toward the center of your being, toward the silence that has always been there, waiting for you to notice it. The mountain calls you, not because it is high and far, but because it is a symbol of what you carry within yourself: stability, clarity, unwavering peace. You are the mountain. You always have been. You've simply forgotten. Solitude is how you remember.